Hi there. Hello again. Thanks for joining me. Um, this week, I've been thinking about why do we have the regulations that we do? Where do they come from? Why are we saddled with this multifarious arrangement of different modal rule books? And why is there no overarching international global multimodal convention that would make life a lot easier for everybody involved in the transport chain? What kicked off this long descent into madness was actually a very nice email I got over the Christmas break from Michael Joyce, our friend in Ireland, who was using his holiday time to look back and do a bit of research and find out where it all started. Those of you who've been around the dangerous goods business for a time will probably know that it really started with the rail industry, which was moving large volumes, particularly of explosives and RID, and certainly rail rules in the States as well. Date back right back to the 19th century, as do the origins of the maritime regulations, although not specifically. I think dangerous goods at the time. There was something on explosives again. But it was only really after World War II and the growth of the chemical industry that made it obvious that some sort of rules were needed, and rules were put in place, certainly in North America. And in Europe, things were slightly different because, of course, there's a lot of borders in Europe, there's a lot of different countries. And so, whereas individual countries were quite at liberty to put in place whatever rules they wanted, it was felt that there needed to be a set of rules for dangerous goods that were travelling across borders. Now, part of this was to do with safety, but an important element of it, as there was in the 1950s, with a lot of the work that the UN was doing through its various agencies, and ADR in particular is managed by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, had a great focus on facilitating trade, because in the 1930s, it was the Depression. The Great Depression was accompanied by a real break on international trade. And if you've ever seen pictures of the ships all tied up along the dock in New York Harbor in the 30s, you'll understand that under economic conditions like that, goods stopped moving, certainly in the volumes that we used to. And the UN was also alert to the fact that it was those economic conditions that laid the ground for what we today, I think, would probably call populist political movements, particularly in Germany, Italy, Spain, but elsewhere as well, and Japan. And that, again, led to a devastating war that was no better for the economy, unless you happen to be in the armaments business. So that's where it started. Of course, the rail rules were already there in place. OTIF was managing RID already, I think. And the UN Economic Commission for Europe established the committee of experts, or committee of rapporteurs, I think, as well, on the transport of dangerous goods to come up with a set of model regulations that the modes could use. Michael Joyce helpfully sent me a copy of the 1957 edition, I think, of ADR, which I think was probably the first, in TypeScript. I'm not sure if it was printed like that, mimeographed. I don't know how many people they thought would need it, but these days, of course, it's a 2-volume, big, shiny, well, the outside is shiny. I spent the weekend tabbing up my new edition. It's a weekend I won't get back. Anyway, My thoughts on this subject were also prompted by looking back 30 years, as I do every month in the pages of HCB magazine, to what we were talking about 30 years ago. And the big thing that we were talking about at the beginning of 1991 was HM181. Now, for those of you who don't operate in the States, you probably don't know what that was, but it was a huge deal at the time. In fact, it had taken about 8 years to get from proposal to fully implemented. And the major salient feature of HM181 was the move in the States from its old DOT specification packaging system to the UN system of performance-oriented packaging. Now, seeing as at the time 90% of dangerous hazmat movements in the US were purely domestic, there were a lot of people who thought, why on earth are we adopting the international rules on this? What's wrong with our old dot spec packaging? Well, there was an increasing volume of international trade, of course, and so having different specifications was becoming a problem. And also, the Department of Transportation felt that having prescriptive rules on packaging was also stifling innovation, because any new packaging design would have to go through a complex approvals process on a case-by-case basis. And users and manufacturers would have to seek special permits or approvals to use those packagings, despite the fact that they could be shown to be of an equivalent level of safety. So that happened. It's taken an awful lot longer for that situation to extend to pressure receptacles, and there's still work to be done on that. But I guess at the time, one of the thoughts was, well, who on earth is going to be shipping goods transatlantic in gas cylinders? Why can't you make it where you need it? Quite often you can, of course, but there are these days specialist gases that do move internationally. Although you never know, with all the supply chain disruption that's attended the COVID-19 pandemic, and everything I hear is that users are looking for more flexible and varied supply chains in order to make sure that their goods are getting to them. Maybe stuff will be made elsewhere, and users won't rely on one single source coming from a long distance. So that partly explains things, I think, as to why things are different. The other big change that's happened since World War II, since the 1960s in particular, of course, was the advent and massive expansion in the use of containerized trade. And what that meant then was that stuff could move more easily around the world in a container than in a tank container. And so you were more likely to get goods in drums, and certainly since the 80s as well in IBCs, moving around the world. And so there needed to be some alignment in the regulations. They're still not fully aligned, and I dare say that if you're shipping from Europe to, let's say Chile, for instance, or from the States to Vietnam, then you may still have problems, but they're not as big as they used to be. There has been a lot of talk, a lot of suggestion about having some sort of international convention, but nobody has been willing to push that through, or probably not willing to do the work that would be necessary. And I certainly hope that I'll be safely retired before anything like that comes along. So the upshot is, that's the way they are. I'm sorry about it. There's nothing we can do. But if you know your history, you'll understand why things are like that. Anyway, that's this week's thought. I look forward to seeing you next week, and I hope you stay well and stay safe, and take care. Bye for now.